Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Garrett Blaine woke up early in the morning to the familiar sound of the alarm clock on his smartphone. The light of the April sun filtered through the bedroom blinds of their tidy house in the suburbs of Chicago. He closed his eyes, getting used to the morning light, and reached out with his hand to the empty half of the bed. Kelly was no longer around. A slight dent in the pillow and the faint scent of her perfume indicated that his wife had gotten up before him. He heard the quiet clink of dishes from the kitchen. Kelly was probably making coffee as usual. Their mornings were usually leisurely. She often got up early to prepare a light breakfast, and he lay in bed for a long time, checking the news on his phone or simply collecting his thoughts before starting the workday. But in recent weeks, Garrett has increasingly noticed that those morning moments are different. It was as if an invisible wall hung between them. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but he felt some kind of tension. Kelly became more distant and thoughtful. Sometimes he caught her distracted glance, as if she was somewhere far away in her thoughts. Garrett threw back the covers and sat on the edge of the bed. On the rug were his slippers, neatly placed by Kelly the night before a little thoughtful habit from his wife. He ran a hand over his face, pushing away the last of the sleep, and tried to convince himself that maybe he was just screwing himself over. Maybe she's just stressed at work, he thought as he stood up. Kelly worked as a marketing manager for a small company and had a busy schedule lately. Garrett was a software engineer himself, often staying late at night at the computer. Work ate up their time, and in the evenings they sometimes only ate a hasty dinner and went to bed, almost without talking. He put on a t-shirt and walked down the stairs to the kitchen. There, standing by the stove, was Kelly, a slender brunette in her 30s, wearing his old t-shirt and lounge shorts. She stirred the oatmeal in the pan, occasionally brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Good morning," Garrett greeted, trying to put the usual warmth into his voice. "Hello," she said and turned around with a smile. "Coffee is ready. I just finished breakfast." She sounded sweet and cheerful as usual. But Garrett couldn't get rid of the feeling that this cheerfulness was somehow tense, stretched, like a mask. He walked up and gently hugged his wife from behind, looking over her shoulder. "It smells delicious," he said quietly, touching her cheek with his lips. "Oatmeal with berries, your favorite," Kelly answered, turning her head slightly towards him. Her cheek was warm, but she could not resist his touch. She gently released herself from the embrace under the pretext of turning off the stove. "Sit down, everything will be ready in a minute." Garrett dropped his hands and stood back, watching as she poured the oatmeal into bowls. He noticed that his heart was beating a little faster than usual. Previously, such morning hugs ended with a kiss or a joke. They laughed. Now something was in the way, as if Kelly was avoiding excessive intimacy. He sat down at the table. The newspaper he had been subscribing to was lying next to his plate, already printed out of its plastic packaging. Kelly brought mugs of coffee. They sat opposite each other, just like hundreds of times before. "How did you sleep?" she asked, taking a bite of toast. "Not bad," Garrett nodded. "Wasn't it a little early for you to get up?" "It was not yet 6 when you left the bedroom." She tensed slightly, it seemed to Garrett, but then she shrugged. "Woke up earlier than the alarm clock. I didn't want to lie around doing nothing. I thought I'd go for a run to cheer myself up, but then I decided to cook us breakfast." "That's nice, thank you," he smiled, but his eyes studied her face. Kelly lowered her eyes to her plate and began to eat. It looked like she wanted to change the subject. Previously, they could chat about everything, but now the conversation was not going well. Garrett felt uneasy again. He opened the newspaper, trying to distract himself. The front page was full of news about city politics, but the letters blurred before my eyes. He glanced at his wife. She quickly finished her oatmeal and drank her coffee. "I need to leave early today," Kelly said suddenly, getting up from the table. "The office is in turmoil. We need to prepare for the morning planning meeting. Garrett looked at his watch. It was only 7:15. She usually didn't leave until 8. Their office was half an hour away. Of course, he drawled, trying to hide his surprise. It is necessary, it is necessary. Kelly disappeared upstairs, apparently to get dressed. Garrett continued to sit, forgetting about breakfast. He felt an unpleasant suspicion arising within him. Why is she in such a hurry? Previously, she did not strive to come to the office before everyone else. And this was after I got up just before dawn. Maybe there really is a rush at work, or is she avoiding him? Trying not to jump to conclusions, he stood up and put the dishes in the sink. Then he went upstairs to get ready for the workday. Kelly was blow-drying her hair in the bathroom. In the mirror, their gazes met for a moment. He wanted to say something encouraging about not overworking her, maybe having dinner out together today, but he changed his mind. Her face in the mirror seemed concentrated, almost distant. She turned off the hair dryer and, without looking at her husband, asked, "How are you today, working from the office or from home?" "I think I'll come home early and work from my office," he replied, putting on his shirt. "And what?" Just wondering, she glanced briefly and smiled, but the smile was formal. "Okay, I ran. Love you." These words sounded mechanical. She left the bathroom, kissed him on the cheek as she walked, and disappeared into the bedroom to grab her bag. A minute later, Garrett heard her footsteps down the stairs and the creak of the front door opening. He remained standing in front of the mirror in empty silence. Slowly, he raised his hand to his cheek, where she kissed him. That goodbye kiss was so quick. Soulless. Previously, every time Kelly left, she would definitely come up, hug her tightly, and kiss her tenderly. And now it's like a formality. Say, "I love you," and run away. Garrett felt his heart clench. He knew that things weren't going well for them lately, but he tried to chalk it up to fatigue and work. But this morning alarmed him more than usual. Some kind of ice lump settled inside. He went into the bedroom. Her silk scarf was left abandoned on the bed where Kelly was getting ready. He picked it up. The subtle aroma of her perfume touched the senses again. Previously, he associated this smell with the warmth and closeness of the woman he loved. Now, for some reason, it was causing me concern. Garrett sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the scarf in his hands. His gaze fell on the bedside table, where there was a framed photo of their wedding. Their happy faces shone in the photo. He was then 28, she was 26. They had just exchanged rings in front of an old church in the suburbs. Kelly laughed, looking up at him, and he proudly hugged his new wife, full of hope. 7 years after the wedding, it seemed that everything was going fine. Home, work, prosperity. But happiness seemed to begin to evaporate, giving way to doubts. He did not want to suspect the worst. He drove away dark thoughts from himself. After all, he loved her, and he believed that she loved him too. However, something was wrong. Garrett ran his finger along the glass of the frame over the face of his wife in the photograph. Could love really cool down like that? Or is it not about love at all? He suddenly remembered their honeymoon. 2 weeks in California, how they carefreely walked along the beach, ate ice cream in the morning, and couldn't keep their hands off each other. Kelly then laughed at his every joke, and in the evenings, covered with one blanket on the terrace, they made grandiose plans for the future. Not a shadow of doubt clouded those days. It was believed that it would always be like this, in a year and in 10. Whatever happens, the two of them will get through it. He remembered waking up at night a few days ago, and Kelly wasn't there. He found her downstairs on the sofa, sitting in the dark with her phone in her hands, the screen of which slightly illuminated her tense face. When he asked if everything was okay, she perked up and said that she just couldn't sleep, so she was scrolling through the news feed, trying to distract herself from insomnia. Then it seemed plausible to him, and he returned to bed yawning. But now, in the light of the morning's worries, that episode looked different. Perhaps she was corresponding with someone. "Why did you go to the living room in the middle of the night?" Garrett felt a chill run down his spine. He put his scarf aside and stood up. "No, it's too early to draw conclusions. You just need to be more careful. Maybe it's really just stress, and he needs to support his wife, take her somewhere to unwind. Deciding not to rush to conclusions, he headed to the shower. But the uneasy feeling did not go away. It was firmly ingrained in my thoughts, like a small crack in glass, which became more and more noticeable every day. Garrett couldn't concentrate on his work. The morning anxiety did not leave him, even when he sat down at the computer in his home office. It seemed like he should delve deeper into the code. He had a project with a deadline in a week, but his thoughts kept returning to Kelly's strange behavior. Why was she in such a hurry today? Was there really this urgent planning meeting? He glanced at the clock in the corner of the screen. 11:30 m. Kelly should have been at work for several hours. They usually texted occasionally during the day, short messages like, "How are you?" or a funny emoticon. Today, Garrett's phone was silent. Kelly hasn't sent anything since this morning. He rubbed his neck, wondering if he should write first. His fingers hovered over the keyboard of his smartphone. What to write? "How was your morning meeting?" Or simply, "How are you?" Finally, he typed, "How are you doing there? Don't overwork yourself," and sent a message. There was no immediate response. 5 minutes past 10. Garrett nervously tapped his pen on the table, looking at the phone. Finally, at 11:45 m, the screen lit up with a message from Kelly. He quickly opened it. "Everything is fine. I'm very busy. I'll write later. Kiss." Short answer. Usually, she would add something else, ask how he was, or mention that she was going to lunch. Now she seemed to wave it off. Busy. Garrett stood up from the table. Anxiety rose inside, growing into a sad suspicion. He decided that work could wait. In the end, if they really have some kind of crisis brewing, it needs to be solved and not hidden behind deadlines. Taking his jacket and car keys, Garrett headed towards the exit. He had an impulse to drive to Kelly's office and suddenly invite her to lunch. They used to do this sometimes. One would come to the other to eat together somewhere nearby. Why not do it now? At the same time, he will see with his own eyes that she really is stuck at work, and perhaps will calm down. The drive to Kelly's office took about 40 minutes. Traffic jams in the city center were buzzing, but Garrett hardly noticed them, turning over options in his head. In no way did he want to seem like a controlling husband. In the end, he really was traveling with good intentions, to support his wife, feed him lunch, distract her for half an hour. There is nothing suspicious about this, so he convinced himself, although his heart was beating faster. Parking at the multi-story office building where Kelly's firm was located, Garrett walked up to the fourth floor. Passing through the glass doors, he found himself in a spacious open space with green partitions and a group of tables. Several employees looked up. Garrett recognized Kelly's colleague Anna, with whom they had crossed paths a couple of times at corporate parties. "Hi, Anna," Garrett tried to look casual. "I dropped by to invite Kelly to lunch." "Is she at home?" Anna, a young woman in a bright blue blouse, smiled a little confusedly. "Oh, hi, Garrett. Kelly doesn't seem to be there. She, in my opinion, left for a meeting or outing." "To a meeting?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. My chest was already feeling cold. "It's strange, she didn't say that she had a departure today." Anna shrugged. "I'm not sure exactly. It seems she went out somewhere about half an hour ago. Maybe to a client. She mentioned something this morning about a sudden meeting outside the office." Garrett felt his insides sink. Nevertheless, he smiled gratefully. "Understood. Thank you, Anna. I guess I won't interfere then." He tried to calmly turn around and leave, although he felt his colleague's curious gaze on him. Already in the corridor, when the office doors closed behind him, the smile disappeared from his face. Outside the office, Kelly didn't say anything about the meeting with the client. Moreover, she usually did not go to clients unannounced. Her position involved planning, not field sales. Garrett quickly walked down to the first floor and went out into the street. A gust of cold April wind hit my face. He looked around, not really knowing where to go now. He took out his phone and dialed Kelly's number. The beeps continued for a long time. There was no answer, no answering machine. The call went on, but she didn't pick up. After the fifth ring, Garrett hung up. My palms were sweating. He looked across the road. There was a small cafe nearby where he and Kelly sometimes ate lunch together. Some vague instinct prompted him to go there. Crossing the street, he scolded himself. What am I doing? Spying on my own wife? But the steps themselves carried him forward. The Maple and Pine Cafe was a cozy place with panoramic windows. Approaching, Garrett looked inside through the glass. There were few visitors at this hour. Lunch would begin closer to noon. And then he froze. Kelly was sitting at one of the tables by the window. A dark-haired man in a jacket sat opposite her. They were talking animatedly about something. Kelly smiled that same smile, a wide, radiant one that once made Garrett's heart skip a beat. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, clearly engrossed in conversation. The man said something, gesticulating, and Kelly laughed in response. Garrett felt a pang of jealousy, although he still tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe this is the same client or colleague. But why didn't she say she was having lunch with someone? And why does she smile at him like that when she's been self-absorbed at home for the last few months? He decided to move closer to the glass, staying outside, but so that he could see better. Now he saw his wife's profile. She looked animated, even happy at that moment. In front of them were 2 glasses of lattes and a plate of croissants for 2. Clearly not a formal meeting, a thought flashed. At some point, the man reached across the table and lightly touched Kelly's hand. She didn't pull her hand away. Moreover, her fingers seemed to gently stroke his hand in response for a moment. Garrett's chest felt cold. This movement was too intimate for just a colleague or client. Garrett felt cold inside. After all, this tenderness, these secret affectionate gestures that had previously belonged to him, Kelly was now giving to another. His heart began to pound, his head spinning from the rush of adrenaline. He stepped back from the window, afraid they might notice him. My breathing quickened. There was little doubt. Kelly was spending time with another man, and it didn't look friendly at all. Garrett stepped a little to the side, trying to regain his composure. What now? Barge in there and cause a scandal. His hands clenched into fists at the thought of this man sitting opposite his wife, touching her the way only he, a husband, should touch her. But making a scene in a public place was an impulse that he did not allow to take over. If he breaks in now, Kelly will simply deny everything or get out of it, and the man will most likely leave. There will be a scandal, a shame. No, we need to act differently. He peeked again. Kelly and her companion were already paying. It looked like they had finished their coffee. Garrett quickly retreated to the nearest corner of the building, from where he could see the exit from the cafe, but he himself remained invisible. A minute later, they came out. The man held the door, letting Kelly in first. She was still smiling at him, saying something. Then she took her phone out of her purse. Garrett felt the vibration of his smartphone. He automatically pulled out his phone. A new message had arrived from her. Sorry, I'm still in a meeting. I'll probably be late until 1 o'clock. Kelly wrote, looking at his wife, who was standing a few meters away, and at that second sending him a false message. Garrett experienced a real shock. The hand trembled involuntarily. He turned his gaze to the man. He was answering something on the phone, taking a step away. Kelly, meanwhile, looked around and suddenly quickly kissed her companion on the cheek goodbye. With a quick glance at her watch, she hurried away along the sidewalk, probably heading back to the office. The man stayed behind, putting his phone away. He watched her go, then turned around and walked in the other direction towards the parking lot. Garrett pressed his back against the cold brick wall, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. It was as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. Kelly lied to him. Obviously lying, using work as an excuse to spend time with this, whoever he was. His body was covered with heat and cold. Thoughts raced through my head, and how long does this last? Who is he? Is this really a betrayal? The picture was still before my eyes. Her tender gaze, the touch of her hands, a light kiss goodbye. Not just a friendly gesture. Garrett clutched the phone until his knuckles turned white. I read her false message again. Frustration and pain rose in a wave in my chest, giving way to anger. However, on top of all this, An icy determination arose in my soul. Now he knew that his worst fears seemed to be coming true. He didn't follow Kelly to her office or call her. Instead, he walked slowly to his car. His hands were shaking, and he barely got the key into the ignition. Having sat down in the salon, he simply sat for a couple of minutes, looking ahead with an unseeing gaze. One thought was pulsating in my head. She's cheating on me. The words sounded like a sentence that made my heart clench. But along with the pain came another feeling of keen desire to find out the truth to the end. If this is true, he must find out everything. How long ago, how deep, and who is this person who dared to interfere with his family? Turning on the engine, Garrett firmly decided he would get to the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Now you can no longer shrug it off or blame it on stress. The heart already knew the answer. All that was left was to get the evidence. Later that evening, Garrett was trying to look calm when he heard Kelly come home around 6. He sat in the living room with a laptop on his lap, ostensibly continuing to work. His heart was pounding loudly in his chest. In the several hours that had passed after what he had seen in the cafe, he had not regained peace of mind. But I decided at all costs to keep my cool for the time being. The front door slammed and Kelly's footsteps were heard. She walked into the living room holding a bag of Chinese takeout. "Hello, dear," she smiled, as if nothing had happened. "I thought that we would be too lazy to cook, so I grabbed dinner on the way. Your favorite sesame chicken." Garrett forced himself to smile back. Looking at her sweet face, it was difficult for him to reconcile two realities: a loving wife caring for him, and a woman who, a few hours ago, had tenderly held another man's hand. "Thank you, that's a great idea," he said as naturally as possible. "How was your day?" He stood up, putting his laptop aside, and went to the kitchen to get some plates, while Kelly laid out the fragrant boxes on the table. "Oh, it's been a long day," she sighed, following him. "This morning meeting dragged on. I barely got through it. Then there was a blockage at the post office, and customers went crazy." Garrett glanced at her. Kelly looked tired, but quite calm. She told all this confidently, without turning away her gaze. If he didn't have the information, he probably would have believed it without a doubt. "Yeah," he said vaguely, putting the plates on the table. "Have you sorted things out with the client?" "With which one?" Kelly hesitated for a second, but immediately continued. "Oh, with that morning? Well, more or less. There is a potential partner there. They want us to promote them and discuss a lot of issues." The meeting seemed to go well. Garrett felt everything boiling in his chest from this shameless lie. But he feigned concern. "Glad to hear. And you're doing great for me." He hugged her slightly and kissed her temple. Kelly leaned against him relaxedly for a second, then gently pulled away, opening the boxes of food. "I'm dying of hunger," she announced. "Let's eat and turn on something, a movie or a TV series." Garrett nodded. Usually on Wednesdays, they had a TV series night, cuddling on the couch. Today, it seemed unbearable to him to pretend that everything was normal. But he understood. In order to get to the bottom of the truth, he needed to play the role of an attentive but unsuspecting husband. They put the food on plates and sat down in front of the TV. Kelly chose a new episode of their favorite detective series. The irony of the situation was not lost on Garrett. On the screen, the detectives figured out the criminal from the evidence, while he himself tried to solve the riddle, sitting next to his own suspect. He hardly touched his food. Occasionally, he glanced at his wife. She seemed to be looking at the screen, but from time to time she checked the phone lying next to her on the sofa. The slightest sound of a notification caught her attention, and every time the screen lit up, Kelly quickly leaned over to see who was writing. Moreover, she did it in such a way that Garrett did not see the contents. The tension grew. Garrett felt like he couldn't sit still. Under the pretext of drinking water, he got up and went to the kitchen, trying to stop the trembling in his hands. Leaning against the countertop, he closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. "Control yourself." "Not now," he told himself firmly. He wanted to snatch the phone from her and see all the secrets hidden there. But that would be premature and probably useless. She would simply take him away, and he would get a scandal without evidence. When he returned, he found Kelly chatting on her phone. Seeing him, she immediately pressed the lock button and put the smartphone down, screen down. Who writes? Garrett asked as nonchalantly as possible, pretending that nothing was special. Yes, for work, she answered too quickly. One colleague asks about the project. At this time, he was mildly surprised. We have a deadline, she shrugged, avoiding his gaze. We need to answer so that tomorrow morning people already have information. Garrett didn't answer. He knew, if this was the same person from the cafe, then she most likely lied and wrote down his name in the phone under someone neutral or under the guise of a colleague. He again felt a wave of anger and pain, but suppressed it. The evening dragged on painfully. When the episode ended, Kelly announced that she was very tired and would go to bed a little earlier. They usually slept together, but Garrett didn't mind. I'll work a little more, he said calmly. I'll catch up with you later. Okay, don't sit too long, she responded and disappeared upstairs. Garrett heard her take a shower and get into bed. A little later, he quietly went upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly open. The lamp on the bedside table glowed warmly. Kelly was already asleep, turning to the empty side of the bed. She was wearing his old t-shirt. She often slept like that, and Garrett used to be touched by it. He froze on the threshold, looking at her sleeping figure. Her hair fanned out across the pillow, her breathing was even. She looked so peaceful and innocent now, and you couldn't tell that this person could be hiding heart-breaking secrets in his soul. There was a lump in Garrett's throat. He simultaneously wanted to gently cover her with a blanket and hold her close and scream in her face everything he had seen today. Walking quietly to the bed, he took Kelly's phone from the nightstand. The screen asked for a PIN code. Garrett knew the code. He dialed. However, a message appeared on the screen, invalid PIN. Garrett tried again, thinking he might have made a mistake. But the result was the same. Kelly changed her code. My heart skipped a beat. When did she manage to do this? He glanced sideways at his sleeping wife. She did not move. Then Garrett put Kelly's finger on the fingerprint scanner. The screen lit up for a second, but the system asked to enter a PIN to unlock after rebooting. Apparently, Kelly recently rebooted her phone, and the simple fingerprint didn't work. Realizing that further attempts might wake her, he regretfully put the phone back in its place. Returning to his office, Garrett fell into his chair. He thought about it. As a programmer, he knew a lot of technologies. He may have a backup plan. A few months ago, he connected Kelly's phone to the family laptop to download photos from their vacation. If then there was access or a backup copy of her data on the computer. He quickly went to the folder on his home computer where he kept his iPhone backups. To his relief, one copy was dated about 2 months ago. It's not the latest material, but it's something. Garrett launched a program to view the contents of the backup. While the files were downloading, he frantically thought about what exactly he was looking for. Messages? Contacts? Photos? The first thing he did was open his contact list and search for a name that might match the stranger from the cafe. Perhaps Kelly recorded it under his usual name. He remembered the man's appearance and searched intensely in his memory. Maybe she had once mentioned a colleague or a friend. Who could it be? The name Brandon came up. Recently, in a conversation, she mentioned Brandon from marketing and said that he was a new specialist from a different department. Perhaps this is him? Garrett entered Brandon and several matches popped up. One contact, Brandon, phone number. His hands shook as he copied the number and pasted it into the search engine on the other screen. After a couple of minutes, he found the result. The number really belonged to a certain Brandon Wallace, an employee of a marketing firm. Most likely, it was that man. His breathing quickened, but Garrett continued digging through the backup. He opened the messages section. Most were routine with Kelly's friends, with colleagues, but Brandon was needed. Finally, he found a clue, messages with Brandon's number. Opening them, he suddenly saw only a couple of old work messages and then emptiness. Perhaps she deleted the correspondence, or they communicated in another messenger. Garrett recalled that Kelly often used WhatsApp and Instagram. He tried to find mentions in the backup. Text messages did not produce results, which means that the main communication was not through SMS. Then he went to the photos folder. Sifting through the images took time, but the patience was rewarded. Among the usual snapshots, selfies, office photos, screenshots of recipes, there were a few that made Garrett's heart clench. In one photo, Kelly sat in her car and smiled while holding a glass of coffee. There were no incriminating details, but Garrett knew every inch of their car, and the interior in the photo was someone else's. Not their car. Whose is it? Perhaps Brandon. Kelly obviously took a selfie to send to him, since the frame was saved. There was no signature, but the expression on her face, playful, happy, spoke for itself. Another photo, just a shot of a bouquet of roses on a table. He hadn't given her roses for a long time, so it's from someone else. And the third photo, which gave Garrett chills, a fuzzy frame, clearly taken by accident, perhaps a video frame. It showed Kelly sitting on a sofa in some unfamiliar room. A man leaned next to her, whose face was partially out of frame, but his figure and dark hair strongly resembled that same stranger from the cafe. Kelly was laughing, her face flushed and her blouse unbuttoned at the top, revealing the hollow of her breasts. Even if the photo was random, the context was clear. Garrett couldn't resist and cursed quietly, leaning back in his chair. It was painful to see, but now at least he had a clue. He saved copies of these photos onto a flash drive. He wanted to wake Kelly right now and present everything, throw this evidence in her face. But what will this give? She would still deny everything, saying that he knows just a couple of ambiguous photos and his guesses. No, we need more. You need to catch her red-handed or collect such evidence that you can't get away with it. Garrett closed his eyes, trying to control his racing heart. He thought about how the woman he loved could cause such pain. But there were no answers yet, there were only facts that needed to be used. He was forced to admit that he alone might not have the composure and skills to follow everything. It may be worth seeking outside help. Garrett remembered his old friend, Tom, who once helped him with various technical things and had the necessary connections. Maybe a private detective, or even Tom himself can follow up. But attracting friends meant washing dirty linen in public. On the other hand, now is not the time to be ashamed. The truth is more expensive. Having made up his mind, he took the phone and wrote a short message. Tom, hi. I really need your help. This is a personal matter. Can you call me back when you're free? Having sent, Garrett looked at the time. It was already past midnight. Tom will not answer right away, but he will wait until morning. In the meantime, we need to somehow survive this night. He glanced at the monitors, where the photographs were still open. My heart sank with pain and rage. These images were etched into his memory, but he forced himself not to take rash steps. There was a tough test ahead, and he had to be ready. Closing the folders and clearing away traces of his search, Garrett quietly returned to the bedroom. He lay down on the very edge of the bed, trying not to disturb Kelly. I lay there for a while, looking at the ceiling, while tears of angry resentment burned my eyes. In the darkness, the empty house seemed like a prison, and the woman next to it looked like a stranger. He wanted to hate her, but for now all he felt was endless sadness and disappointment. In the morning, Garrett woke up after a heavy, restless sleep. Kelly was no longer nearby. She quietly got up before him, just like yesterday. Hearing the sound of running water in the shower, he realized that today he would not have time to talk frankly with her. However, he had no intention of finding out anything openly just yet. The phone flashed with a message. This was the response from Tom. Hello, old man. Is everything okay? What happened? Garrett, trying not to make any noise, quickly typed out the answer. Not on the phone. Can we meet as soon as possible? It's very necessary. Almost immediately it came. Certainly. I'll take the day off. Come to my place in an hour or wherever is convenient. Garrett knew he could rely on Tom. They had been friends since their student years, and although they had communicated less frequently lately, he trusted him like a brother. Tom was a shrewd guy and knew how to keep his mouth shut. When Kelly stepped out of the shower, Garrett had already prepared for another day of pretending. He was making coffee in the kitchen when she came down, wrapped in a fluffy towel, her hair still damp on her shoulders. "Oh, coffee," she said, smiling. "Smells great." "Good morning," Garrett answered calmly. "I decided to pamper you." She came closer and reached for the mug, but Garrett silently moved her hand away and brought the cup to her lips, playfully. "Allow me, madam," he smiled. Kelly laughed and took a sip straight from his hand. Delicious." "Thank you, darling." She looked a little surprised by his sudden gallantry, but pleased. Garrett looked at her softly. The morning light fell on her face. How difficult it was to combine this image, a loving wife, trusting, carefree with what was hiding behind his back. He looked for even a shadow of doubt or guilt in her eyes, but saw only the usual tenderness. Perhaps she felt completely calm, confident that her husband did not suspect anything. "What are your plans for today?" he asked as if nothing had happened. "Oh, as usual, work. A meeting with a new client in the afternoon, a meeting with the team in the late afternoon." Kelly took another sip of coffee and headed into the living room to pack her laptop and documents into her bag. Garrett followed her, continuing the conversation. "Sounds rich. Will you have time to have a proper lunch?" "I'll try," she said over her shoulder, putting away the papers. "If not, I'll have something to eat on the go." He nodded, trying to remember every detail. The meeting with the client, the meeting. Perhaps one of these events is another lie. Half an hour later, Kelly left for work, kissing him goodbye a little more tenderly than yesterday. Maybe she was appeased by her husband's morning attention, or maybe she was just in a good mood. When the door closed behind her, Garrett immediately grabbed the phone and called Tom. He answered on the first ring. "Harry, hi. I'm leaving. I'll be with you in 20 minutes. Are you okay?" Some kind of voice. "I'll tell you later," Garrett answered quietly. "Waiting for you." He glanced at his watch. Today, he himself had to be at a planning meeting in the office by 10, but it was going to hell. He felt that now it was more important to deal with his personal nightmare than with his official affairs. About the promised time, Tom arrived. Through the window, Garrett saw a familiar blue pickup truck pull up in front of their house. He went out onto the porch. Tom stepped towards him. Tall, strong, with tousled dark brown hair, Tom was still the same guy Garrett remembered in any trouble, reliable and ready to help. He just took off his sunglasses and immediately asked, peering into his friend's face. "Damn, what happened? You're pale." Garrett motioned for him to come inside. As soon as they sat down in the kitchen, he began to explain lamely. He told everything, about recent suspicions, about yesterday's trip to the office, the scene he saw in the cafe, about the night searches and photographs. Tom listened in silence, only clenching his jaw. At some point, he cursed quietly when he heard about Kelly kissing someone else, but did not interrupt. When Garrett finished speaking, tears involuntarily appeared in his eyes again. He brushed them away with his palm, irritated by his own weakness. "Sorry," he said hoarsely. "I'm just still in shock. I don't know what to do." Tom shook his head. "Don't apologize. Anyone in your place? Damn." He slammed his fist against his knee, then exhaled, trying to pull himself together. Okay. First, you are doing great. I didn't do anything stupid right away, that's right. Now you need to understand the action plan." Garrett nodded. He looked at his friend with gratitude. He needed support now like air. "I thought." He began, "I need proof, not just photos from an old copy. Real, fresh. To deny her any chance. And then what?" Tom asked softly. Garrett clenched his fists on the table. He imagined many scenarios, from a quiet divorce, throwing evidence on her table, to a public scandal. Bitterness and anger seethed within him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want her to be sorry, to understand who she betrayed. Just getting a divorce is too easy for her." It was as if nothing had happened. She must answer for this. There was such firmness in Garrett's voice that Tom looked at him carefully. Well, I think I can help you collect evidence. We'll decide what to do with them. He put his hand on his friend's shoulder. I'm very sorry, brother. Kelly, never would have thought, Tom said quietly. Me too, Garrett smiled bitterly, but the fact remains a fact. They were silent. Then Garrett collected his thoughts. Do you, by any chance, know any private detectives? Or do you know how to track it? Tom chuckled. I don't know any detectives, but do you remember my cousin Jason? He's a cop at the precinct, doing technical stuff. He once boasted that they had gadgets like GPS beacons that could be attached anywhere. I think he can borrow it for a day without any questions asked. Garrett raised his eyebrows. Do you think this is not too much? Now is not the time to be shy, Tom snapped. You need the truth. If she goes to this guy, we can track the route. Garrett felt grateful again. That would be great. Tom took out his phone. I'll call Jace right now. While Tom retreated to the next room to make a call, Garrett tried to realize that he had actually started this dangerous game of surveillance. Just yesterday morning, the thought of spying on his wife seemed wild to him, but today he was ready to do anything for the sake of the truth. Tom returned, holding the car keys. Let's go. Jace will leave the device at the agreed location in an hour. We'll make it just in time. Garrett stood up in agreement. Let's go. They reached the agreed-upon point, a parking lot near a large supermarket. There, under the trash can, Tom found a small black device the size of a pack of cigarettes. Here, a GPS tracker, he said, showing Garrett the device. Magnetic, we'll attach it under the bumper of her car. Garrett looked around nervously. How do we get to her car? She's at work. Do you have spare keys to Kelly's car? To open, if anything? Yes, at home. But why open it? You can stick it on the outside. Right? The main thing is that she doesn't notice later. Tom nodded. They returned to Garrett's house to wait until evening. The plan was to drive up to Kelly's office near the end of the day and attach a beacon to her car while she was inside. The day dragged on painfully. Garrett didn't even try to work. Instead, she and Tom sat in the kitchen, going over the details. Tom insisted that Garrett have a camera and a video camera in his car to take pictures if anything was captured. He brought his SLR camera with a good zoom from home. If we're lucky, we'll film them together, he said, checking the camera's battery. If you're unlucky, at least the route will be known. Around 5 in the evening, they went to Kelly's office. Garrett's heart was pounding. He realized that he was stepping over the line of ordinary life into a world where he was forced to track down a loved one like a criminal. They parked on a nearby street and waited until the office parking lot was a little empty of departing employees. Kelly's car, a silver sedan, stood in its usual place. Tom pulled his cap lower and walked up to the car, holding the tracker. Garrett watched from his car, holding his breath. A minute later, Tom returned and extended his thumb. Ready, stays firmly under the rear bumper. Now you can go. In the car, Tom opened the screen of his tablet, installing the tracking program. A flashing dot appeared on the map. The beacon was transmitting a signal. It works, Garrett breathed. Now all that remained was to wait to see where Kelly would go after work. Around 6, the dot on the screen moved. Garrett, who was driving, turned on the engine. Let's go get her. They kept their distance, following the silver sedan through the city streets. Kelly wasn't driving home. That became immediately clear when she turned in the opposite direction from their neighborhood. Garrett looked ahead tensely, and Tom announced the direction on the map. She drove south, turned onto the highway, probably to the outskirts. What could be there? Garrett muttered, although his heart already knew the answer. There, far from her usual places, probably another secret meeting awaited her. Garrett followed the flashing dot on the map. His heart sank. The place Kelly arrived was too secluded to be part of the workday. The parking lot was visible through the trees. Kelly's car was parked next to another vehicle, a black SUV. There were almost no people around, just a couple of runners on a path near the water in the distance. Looks like we've arrived, Tom said quietly, picking up the camera. Shall we watch from here or get closer? Garrett felt his heart ache again. In the park where she and Kelly once walked on weekends, she is now apparently dating someone else. But he clenched his teeth. We'll get there, he decided. Over there, behind those bushes closer to the parking lot. They got out of the car and, trying not to attract attention, moved along the edge of the park, hiding behind the trees. They soon met the scene. Kelly got out of her car and walked towards a black SUV. A man came out of it, the same brunette from the cafe. Now Garrett saw him clearly. Tall, wearing a leather jacket, he approached Kelly. Even from a distance, you could see how Kelly began to smile as she looked at him. The man hugged her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. Their lips met in a kiss long, greedy. Garrett's vision went blurry. He felt Tom tighten his grip on his elbow, as if afraid that his friend would lose control. Garrett actually took a step forward, but Tom whispered, "Calm down, friend. We need evidence." Garrett froze, overcome with fury. He glared at his wife, who was cheating on him. Meanwhile, Tom quickly clicked the camera, filming the date with a zoom lens. Kelly and her lover, unaware of anything, continued their romantic scene. Standing next to the cars, they spoke too quietly to be heard. Then the man leaned down again and kissed Kelly on the neck, causing her to burst into quiet laughter that could be heard even from a distance. Garrett clenched his fists until it hurt. Each of their kisses felt like a knife in the heart. A couple of minutes later, the couple got into a black SUV, apparently his car, and the doors slammed. The windows were tinted, nothing was visible inside, but the car did not move. "Damn, they probably," Garrett muttered quietly, unable to say it out loud. Tom nodded heavily, lowering the camera. "Looks like it." There was a buzzing in Garrett's ears. He understood. Now, perhaps, right a few meters away from him, his wife was making love with another man, or at least indulging in hot caresses. The thought of this drove me crazy. He suddenly found it difficult to breathe. He wanted to rush, pull them out of the car, smash everything around. But Tom held him back again, whispering, "Hush. You won't unsee this. That's enough. Let's leave before anyone notices us." Garrett, as if in a fog, allowed himself to be led further into the trees. My knees were buckling. Stopping behind a thick bush, he bent over, leaning his hand on a tree trunk, and spilled everything that was in his stomach onto the grass. He was shaking. Tom stood next to him, patting him on the back. "Sorry that you had to see this, but now there are no doubts." Garrett wiped his mouth with his sleeve and straightened up. The face was burning either from humiliation or from rage. The eyes were dry, the tears seemed to have been burned away by anger. "That's it," he whispered with cold determination. "Now that's it for sure." "Are we going?" Tom asked carefully. Garrett nodded. "We had to take a roundabout way back to the car so as not to catch the eye of the unfaithful couple." When the friends finally found themselves inside their car, Garrett hit the steering wheel with his fist so hard that Tom flinched. "Calm down," Tom repeated, although he himself was pale from what he saw. "Now you have a photo, you saw everything with your own eyes." Garrett gripped the steering wheel, trying to stop the shaking. "Yes, now she won't leave me," he said quietly, and steel rang in his voice. On the way home, they discussed further actions. Garrett already had a plan in mind, not just to present evidence, but to make Kelly herself go through the pain and humiliation that he experienced. "I want to give her some kind of trial," Garrett said, looking ahead. "Let her feel that her lies are being revealed piece by piece, so that she herself can reach her punishment." Tom gave him a worried look. "Are you sure you want to play this game? Maybe right away. Well, you'll say that you know everything and it's a scam." Garrett shook his head. "No, I believed her for too long. She's been deceiving me for too long. I want her to remember this forever." Tom was silent for a while and then quietly asked, "What are you planning?" The car stopped at a traffic light. Garrett turned to his friend, the fire of determination burning in his eyes. "I'll arrange a quest for her." Tom exhaled. "Tough, but I think it's deserved. How can I help?" "Help me organize everything. I'm afraid I can't handle it alone. We need to think about what places, what clues, and most importantly, the ending." Garrett was already mentally building a chain. Where did she lie to him? Where did you go? Perhaps this parking lot by the river will become one of the points they were caught there. Another cafe. What else? Tom, seeing his friend's concentrated face, carefully asked, "Which places do you want to choose?" Garrett began to curl his fingers. Firstly, the place where she lied that she was at work and she sat with him. Remember that cafe, Maple and Pine? We saw them there during the day. Tom nodded. The park by the river where they kissed. Garrett's voice wavered, but he continued firmly. That's where she went under the guise of, "I'll be late at the office." This is the second point. Tom winced. You'll lead her straight to the crime scene. Tough. But it's clear, Garrett grinned evilly. Let him feel it. He thought for a moment, then added, "And the final point is where she gave me an oath of allegiance. Our wedding church. St. Mary S." Tom clarified, and from the expression on Garrett's face, he realized that he had hit the nail on the head. "Are you sure you want to take this there?" Garrett clenched his fists. "That's where it should end. She desecrated our vows, and there she will answer for them." Tom exhaled slowly. "Okay, it turns out a cafe, a park, a church. 3 dots. We need clues that will lead her there." "I think there will be 4, Garrett objected after a pause. "Let's start not right away with her lies, but with the good. To take you by surprise. I want the first clue to lead to something pleasant from the past, to make her relax." "I understand, so that she doesn't guess," Tom drawled. "Well, for example, the place of your first kiss or date." Garrett smiled faintly, remembering that moment under the old lantern. "Exactly. In the park on Maple Street, under the lamppost, where we first kissed." Tom wrote something down on his phone. "Okay." Tom was silent for a while. "Then how do we make the hints ourselves? Notes, riddles." Garrett thought. "Yes, we'll write her notes. The first one on my behalf, romantic, with a hint of the place. I'll make the second one more complicated, about a cafe. I'll come up with a poem or something. Third, in the park, I will attach proof of photo." He glanced at the camera with the incriminating evidence. Tom nodded understandingly. "Well, that sounds doable," said the friend. "I'll help you put them in the right places in the morning so that no one finds them ahead of time." Garrett put a grateful hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Tom. I couldn't have done it without you." Tom smiled sadly. "I hope you don't regret this show later." Garrett shook his head. "I have nothing to regret anymore, and she will have a lesson." Now he had everything he needed in his hands, knowledge supported by evidence and a burning desire to restore justice. Kelly woke up late, when the sun was already high outside the window. It was almost 9 in the morning. It was a Saturday, and usually he and Garrett liked to sleep in on the day off and then cook brunch together. However, now only a note was found on the pillow nearby. Garrett wasn't there. Kelly's heart pounded loudly as she was overcome with anxiety for a split second. But, propping herself up on her elbow, she took the note in her hands. Recognizing her husband's neat handwriting, she smiled with relief. On a piece of paper folded in half was written, "Good morning, sleepyhead. I ran out to get some fresh croissants. I'll be back soon. P.S. There's something waiting for you in the kitchen." Curiosity got the better of drowsiness. Kelly threw on her robe and headed downstairs barefoot. The croissants sounded tempting. Garrett apparently decided to give her a pleasant surprise for Saturday morning. Entering the kitchen, she immediately noticed on the table not only a plate of warm croissants from their favorite bakery, but also a large cream-colored envelope. On top of it was the inscription, "For my beloved wife." Kelly raised her eyebrows in surprise and sat down at the table. She carefully opened the envelope, thinking it was a postcard or letter. Inside was a folded, thick sheet of paper and some old photographs. She looked at the photo first, and a warm memory touched her heart. It was a photo from 7 years ago. Her and Garrett at the park fair, laughing, covered in cotton candy. Kelly remembered that day, their third or fourth date, when everything was carefree and romantic. Garrett then won a teddy bear for her at the shooting range, and they ate cotton candy until their stomachs hurt. She smiled sadly, stroking her thumb over Garrett's smiling face in the photo. In recent months, there had been so much tension between them that such memories seemed from another life. Cringing inside with slight guilt, Kelly unfolded the letter. It read, "Dear Kelly, today I have prepared a special surprise for you. Our relationship is going through some difficult times, but I want to remind you of all the good times we had. That's why I did it for your memory game. You will follow the clues. Each one will lead you to a place connected with our history. I hope this day brings us back to what we were before." So here's the first hint. We're under the light of a lantern. For the first time, you and I caught the shine of the stars in each other's eyes. When you find the place, the next clue awaits you. Good luck, my love. See you at the end of the game. Yours, Garrett. Kelly got goosebumps. My heart ached with many feelings: joy at the unexpected romantic gesture, relief that perhaps Garrett did not feel her distance, and at the same time, acute shame. She knew exactly which place was described in the riddle. Under the light of the lantern and stars shining in the eyes are clearly about the old lantern in the city park on Maple Street, where one evening, returning from their first date, he and Garrett stopped and kissed for the first time. Then, 7 years ago, the lantern was blinking, they were laughing, and Garrett said that the stars were reflected in her eyes. Kelly sighed, feeling tears welling in her eyes. How many years have passed, but he remembers, and he arranged it for her sake. But everything shrank inside. She remembered last night. She quickly lied to Garrett about being tired and corresponded with Brandon, planning the next meeting. Conscience barely audibly scratched inside, but Kelly habitually pushed it away. I'll stop everything just. A little more, she justified herself not for the first time. However, now the feeling of guilt has intensified many times over. This quest is such a touching, trusting gesture. Garrett seemed to want their love back, and she secretly breaks his heart. Kelly ran her hand over her face, brushing away the tears that had formed. Wow, what have I come to? For a moment, she wanted to give up everything, run to him and confess everything, ask for forgiveness. But fear gripped her. She was afraid to destroy this fragile hope of reconciliation that her husband's act gave her. I was afraid to confess and lose him forever. Maybe I can fix everything. A thought flashed. Beat this game, remember how much we loved each other, and then I will have enough strength to break up with Brandon completely. Deciding to put aside the gloomy thoughts, at least for today, Kelly stood up. She carefully put the photo and letter back in the envelope and put it in the chest of drawers in the hallway. She will keep it as a treasure. Then I quickly got dressed and put on my sneakers more comfortably apparently. I had to do a lot of traveling and walking around the city. Before leaving, she couldn't resist writing a message to Garrett: "You're crazy. Thanks for the surprise. I'm starting the game." The answer came almost immediately: "Good luck, my love. Waiting for you." Kelly took a deep breath, trying to stop her hands from trembling from the surging emotions. She couldn't remember the last time Garrett had called her darling so sincerely. Maybe there is still a chance to save their marriage. She will do anything to get back what they had. She followed her usual route to the park on Maple Street. It was a small square in a cozy area, with a children's playground and old lanterns. On a weekend morning, there was almost no one here, only an elderly jogger trotted along the path. Kelly walked along the alley to that very lantern. It still stood in its place, a peeling green pillar under which they had once kissed under the stars and laughed. My heart ached with tenderness for the memory. She looked around. If there is a clue hidden here, where is it? The clue could be a note hidden somewhere nearby. Kelly sat down on the bench near the lantern and looked around. Her gaze fell on a small card taped to the back of the bench, almost unnoticeably. The card had a picture of a heart and the inscription in marker, "For Kelly." Looking around to see if anyone was watching, Kelly peeled it off. On the back of the card, there was a poetic quatrain: "Where the truth is under a foamy cappuccino, you hid your smile as if nothing had happened. The second key awaits you. You will find it where the mystery began to unravel." Kelly read these lines once, twice. A smile was still playing on her lips, but an unpleasant chill had already begun to cool her heart. If the first clue was obvious and warm about the first kiss, then this one is somehow strange. I hid the truth under a foamy cappuccino with a smile. What does this mean? And the secret began to unravel. She thought about it. Cappuccino. Smile. Coffee-related place. She and Garrett often drank coffee together. But she hid the truth. Kelly suddenly felt like everything was shrinking inside her. The same meeting in the cafe came to mind Maple and Pine a few days ago, when she deceived Garrett by saying that she was at work, and she sat with Brandon, sipping a cappuccino and smiling at her husband on the phone, assuring him that everything was fine. Did Garrett really suspect something then? Or, no, that's impossible. He couldn't know. Most likely, we are talking about something else. Maybe about the day when she was upset about a failed project, and they went to drink cappuccino to console themselves. She did not immediately admit to him that she had messed up, and hid the truth under a smile. Yes, perhaps he meant it, Kelly reassured herself. But the line, "the secret began to unravel," worried her. What secret? There was no secret in those old circumstances. She just didn't tell him about the troubles at work, but then she told him herself. Kelly bit her lip nervously. She didn't want to stay in the cold doing nothing, so she decided to check the obvious version, a cafe Maple and Pine. Still, this place was important. They once loved to have breakfast there on weekends, and just recently Garrett went there to pick her up, although then she deceived him. Shivering from an unpleasant thought, she headed back to the car. The road to the cafe took about 20 minutes. Kelly's mind was filled with doubts. Why did she immediately think about that incident with Brandon? Maybe conscience. Enough, she pulled herself together. It's just a game. Garrett wouldn't hurt anyone with this play. He wants to bring back the good times. She wasn't sure how convincing her own thoughts were, but she repeated them like a mantra. Maple and Pine was on the corner of a busy street, but there were few customers on a Saturday morning. Kelly parked and went inside. The air smelled of fresh pastries and coffee. Bored baristas were hanging out at the counter. She looked around the hall. How to find a hint? Last time the note was pinned in plain sight. Maybe here somewhere too? Kelly's heart was beating faster. She walked along the window tables where they usually sat. In the far corner, near the same table by the window where she had smiled at Brandon a few days ago, there was something taped under the tabletop. She noticed the edge of the white paper. Walking closer, Kelly crouched down, pretending to tie a shoelace, and felt for the piece of paper under the table with her hand. Yes, there was a paper envelope taped there. She quickly peeled it off and straightened up, trying not to attract the attention of the cafe staff. She hurriedly walked outside, clutching the envelope in her hands. Her heart was pounding more and more. Now she discovers that there is a message hidden inside. She got into the car, and as soon as she closed the door, she decided to open the envelope, feeling her fingers trembling. Inside was a sheet with another message. "You're doing well, Kelly, but the further you go, the harder it gets. Next step, go to where forbidden kisses are hidden under the canopy of trees. You know this place very well." Kelly's mouth was dry. The lines floated before my eyes. Forbidden kisses under the canopy of trees. A picture flashed in my head like lightning. A quiet riverbank where just the other day she kissed Brandon in a secluded corner of the park. She felt her breath catch in her throat. No, no, no. I started shaking inside. Suddenly, all the romantic charm of the game evaporated, giving way to chilling horror. These words could not be an accident. He knew. Looks like Garrett knew everything. Kelly looked around nervously, as if expecting her husband to appear around the corner. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. What should she do? Continue the game? But it doesn't feel like a memory game anymore. Rather, to her trial. Her hands shook so much that she dropped the note into her lap. At the bottom of the envelope, I noticed something else, a small photo print. Kelly pulled it out and turned it right side out. The world before my eyes collapsed. The photo was of herself, her profile clearly visible in Brandon's arms. They kissed near a black SUV against the backdrop of trees. It was literally 2 days ago, that same evening. Someone took a photograph of them. Kelly gasped, feeling as if she had fallen from a height. My ears started ringing. The paper trembled in his hands. Now everything is clear. This is not an attempt to bring back romance. This is payback. The first impulse was to call Garrett, beg for forgiveness, explain everything. She frantically reached for her phone and began looking for her husband's number. But then the screen flashed with an incoming call. Called Tom, Garrett's best friend. Kelly was confused, but answered automatically. T-Tom? Kelly, Tom's voice was unusually cold. I think you already understand what's going on. Do what the prompts tell you. Don't try to run away or be cunning. Please, she gasped, unable to gather her thoughts. It's Garrett. He knows. He knows, Tom snapped. And I'm on his side. Keep that in mind. Move on with your assignments. If you try to evade, all your mutual friends and relatives will receive very unpleasant evidence. So play by the rules, Kelly. He hung up before she could answer. Kelly froze, clutching her phone. She wanted to scream or burst into tears. Fear, shame, and guilt were mixed in my head. But there was no way out. She took a deep breath, trying not to completely lose control. We must move on. Maybe Garrett will listen to her in the end. Maybe we can still. Explain. Her legs felt like they were weak. She started the car and drove out of the parking lot. The next point was definitely that park on the riverbank, their secret place. A secret place that is no longer a secret. Tears burned in her eyes, but Kelly stubbornly held them back. It's her own fault. Now all that remained was to follow this painful route to the end. Kelly drove the car along a familiar highway, not even remembering how she started. Tears blurred her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand so she could see the road. There was a noise in my head. Everything had collapsed. Everything had been revealed. Her heart froze and pounded, throwing her either hot or cold. She turned to a small park area on the river bank, the very place where just recently she allowed herself to lose herself in the arms of others. Now this silence and solitude frightened her. Kelly pulled the car to the side of the road, next to an empty playground. The park seemed deserted in the early afternoon hours of the weekend. Stepping out of the car on shaky legs, she looked around the area. The wind moved the branches of the trees. The sun serenely played with reflections on the water. Nature remained indifferent to her personal drama. Kelly took a few steps along the path, feeling as if the ground was floating under her feet. Where can I look for a hint here? Deep down, she knew that Garrett must have chosen a specific place, the same place where he and Brandon came. Further along the path, behind the lilac bushes, there was a small clearing near the water, a secluded corner hidden from prying eyes. It was there that 2 days ago she, forgetting about everything, kissed her lover, thinking that the world belonged only to the two of them. Now this place was terrifying. Kelly walked forward slowly, her whole body trembling. It seemed that the shadows of the trees were watching her with silent reproach. Every step was difficult, but she had to find out what Garrett had in store. Here are the familiar lilac bushes. Kelly pushed aside the flexible branches and walked out into that very clearing. My heart skipped a beat. On the grass, exactly in the middle of this improvised shelter, there was a white envelope. He stood out against the background of greenery as if he was waiting for her. Kelly stepped closer and knelt down, afraid of what she would find inside. There was no writing on the envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph and a sheet of paper. Kelly took a closer look at the photo and quietly sobbed. It was their wedding photo, the same one that stood in their bedroom at home. She and Garrett 7 years ago, happy in a white dress and suit, kissing on the church porch. In the corner of the photo, Garrett wrote by hand in black marker, "Do you remember this day?" Biting her lip until it hurt, Kelly unfolded the piece of paper lying under the photo. What she read made her heart clench with shame. "In this holy place you promised to love and be faithful. There, under the arches of the church, you swore honesty before God and people. Now go there if you dare to step on the threshold that you have consecrated. They are waiting for you there for the final answer. At the bottom of the sheet was the address St. Mary's Church on Oak Street and time, 12 o'clock today. Kelly put her hand over her mouth, holding back her sobs. He invited her to their wedding church. God. So, the parents and everyone. Is he going to tell everyone? She became truly scared. She sank onto the grass, feeling like she was about to faint. The whiskey was knocking. What have I done? What have I done? Was beating in my head. She will now disappoint so many people and cause pain not only her husband, but also her relatives. This thought was worse than death. It's probably not too late. Not to go there, try to hide, but Tom's words on the phone made it clear. Running away would only make matters worse. Everyone will receive evidence and find out without her. Garrett foresaw this option as well. You can't escape fate. Gathering her remaining strength, Kelly rose from the ground. She automatically brushed off her knees. There were wet spots in the grass from her tears. Having hidden the envelope with the photo and letter in her bag, Kelly staggered back to the car. Going to church seemed to her the most terrible ordeal. My fingers were numb on the steering wheel. Along the way, several times she caught herself praying in a whisper, "Let there be no one there. Please, if only it's not the parents. If only." But reason suggested that there was little hope. The message clearly states, waiting for the final answer. Not, I'm waiting, but they're waiting in the plural. That is, there will be others there, witnesses of her shame. A few minutes earlier, Garrett had stood at the altar under the high vault of the church, looking out at the assembled family and friends. He could feel his heart beating in his throat, but he tried to remain coolly determined. None of those present really knew why they were invited. Garrett only asked everyone to come, saying that he had something important to announce about his marriage to Kelly. Garrett's parents and brother shifted from foot to foot near the first bench. Mom tried to squeeze out a smile of support for her son, although there was concern in her eyes. The father frowned around the church hall, apparently suspecting something was wrong. Kelly's parents, on the other hand, looked puzzled and alarmed. They arrived after hearing only a cryptic statement from Garrett. "You need to know the truth." Tom stood next to Garrett, throwing on his jacket for the sake of appearance. He silently put his hand on his friend's shoulder and quietly asked, "Are you sure you're ready? They're all here." Garrett nodded, clutching a thin folder with documents in his palm. There were screenshots of correspondence, photographs of infidelity, a copy of the prenuptial agreement, and a completed application for divorce. All the evidence and consequences are neatly put together. This gave him strength. "When she comes, I'll start," he answered Tom in a whisper. There was tension in the air. Rachel, Kelly's close friend, approached Garrett's parents, quietly asking if they knew what was wrong. They just shrugged. Garrett's brother, Michael, gloomily asked Garrett himself, "You're scaring us, brother. What's happening?" Garrett looked at the worried faces of those gathered. It was hard for him to stall for time. "You'll find out everything soon. We'll wait for Kelly," that's all he said. And as if on cue, the heavy doors of the church creaked, letting in a stream of daylight. Stepping through the threshold, Kelly tried to stop trembling and looked up. Several people stood along the narrow passage between the rows of wooden benches. She recognized almost everyone. There were her parents with tense faces, Garrett's brother and his wife, Kelly's close friend Rachel, a couple of mutual friends. There were 10 people in total, no more. Everyone looked at her, some sympathetically, some condemningly. And in the very center, at the altar, with his back to the images of the saints, stood Garrett. Kelly met her husband's gaze and immediately lowered her eyes, unable to bear the expression on his face. This was the worst. There was no love or warmth left in his eyes, only cold pain and determination. This Garrett seemed alien to her. There was silence in the church, only the quiet crackling of candles echoed under the arches. Kelly noticed that Garrett's father had his hand on his mother's shoulder, as if supporting her. Kelly's mother covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes were red. Apparently, she had already cried. Kelly wanted to say something, at least, hello or I. But her throat was tight. She took a hesitant step forward along the aisle, feeling the weight of a dozen gazes on her. Shame, burning, all-consuming, gripped her. Garrett spoke first. His voice rang clear and calm under the high ceiling. "Come here, Kelly." He didn't call her sweetie or her name endearingly like he usually did, just an even, almost formally polite tone. This made everything inside her clench even more. She hobbled to the altar. There were a couple of meters between them. Garrett looked her up and down, and it was someone else's gaze, assessing her, as if looking at a criminal. "Our loved ones have gathered here," he said loudly, addressing everyone present in the same way. "Because it was in front of them, 7 years ago, that we took oaths of allegiance and love within these walls. Today, within these same walls, the truth must come out." Kelly's vision began to blur, and it became difficult to breathe. At the edge of her consciousness, she heard her mother's quiet sob and her father's heavy sigh somewhere behind her. Garrett continued, as if conducting a court hearing. "I thought for a long time about what to do. My wife," he emphasized this word with bitterness, "betrayed me. She betrayed our family, our vows. But I decided to give her a chance to tell the truth to all of us in the face." He paused. A wave of muffled whispers swept through the church. Kelly felt the ground disappear from under her feet. It was worse than any nightmare. Her own father seemed unable to even look at her, his eyes cast to the floor. "Kelly," Garrett addressed her directly for the first time since her appearance. "Do you have anything to say?" His tone stern, harsh, made her want to fall into the ground. Kelly looked up at him with difficulty. His face was impassive, only his jaw was twitching. She opened her mouth, but for several seconds she could not squeeze out a sound. Finally, she said hoarsely, I'm sorry. Garrett, I don't know what." The voice broke. "Don't know what to say?" he asked coldly. "Maybe you can start with the truth. Will you tell everyone where you were the night before yesterday or last week?" Kelly trembled. Glances, many glances glared at her. Some of them were shocked, incomprehensible, some already knew, apparently in general terms, but were waiting for details. She felt naked, as if she stood there not in her dress, but without skin. "Garrett, please," she whispered pleadingly, taking a step towards him and extending her hand. He pulled back half a step, not allowing himself to be touched. "No, don't you dare ask me for forgiveness." His voice trembled with anger, but he restrained himself. "Explain to them. Tell them how you lied to all of us." Kelly was shaking. She turned to the people standing behind her, seeing their confusion and pain. The father looked at her with a hard look. The mother cried quietly, burying herself in his shoulder. Rachel put her hand to her mouth, not believing what was happening. Looking at what she had done, Kelly felt her resistance breaking. Something in my chest broke with shame and remorse. There was no strength left to lie, and there was no point. She took a deep breath, trying to speak louder, but her voice trembled treacherously. "I made a terrible mistake. I cheated on my husband." She barely uttered the last words, feeling that she was burning with shame. My legs were giving way. Everything was blurry before her eyes, but she saw Garrett's mother sway as if losing her balance, and Garrett's brother cursed under his breath as he turned away. Kelly's knees finally gave out, and she sank onto a bench in the front row, covering her face with her hands. "With whom?" Garrett's inexorable voice was heard above her. "Tell them who you betrayed me with and how long it lasted." Kelly shook her head, sobbing. "Don't. Please." Garrett turned to the others. "Well, she doesn't want to say the name." "Then I'll call." With Brandon Wallace, a colleague from her office. Someone gasped loudly. Kelly felt her mother twitch when she heard the unfamiliar name. "A few months, as I found out," Garrett spoke abruptly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Meetings behind my back, lies about work, about meetings with friends." He ran his hand over his face, trying to control himself. Then, having gathered, he loudly and clearly addressed everyone. "I didn't gather you here just for the sake of exposure. But just so you know, from this moment on, there is no longer any marriage between us. I can't be with a person who did this." Kelly raised her tear-stained face to him. "Garrett, don't leave me. Please. I'll fix everything, I beg you." She broke into a sob, ready to throw herself at his feet. "Will you fix it?" He smiled bitterly. "How do you fix this, Kelly? Will you bring back the nights I spent in the dark while you were with him? Will you regain my trust, respect from your parents and friends?" She shook her head, unable to find an answer. He spoke the truth, nothing can be returned. Garrett pulled out a document from the inside pocket of his jacket and threw it on the bench next to her. "Here, these are completed divorce papers. I'll sign them right after this event." Kelly looked at the papers with a blurred gaze, standard forms with their names written here and there. He prepared everything in advance. "No," was all she could whisper, realizing that something irreparable was happening. Sobs were heard all around. Someone was trying to stop the crying, it seemed like the mother. Garrett's father slowly shook his head, looking at Kelly as if she were a stranger. Garrett, meanwhile, turned to his and Kelly's parents. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I thought it was important for the truth to be heard in front of you." Kelly's father sighed heavily and asked with a trembling voice, "Is this true, daughter?" "Everything." "Really?" Kelly lowered her head, not daring to look her father in the eye. "Yes, Dad," she barely managed to say. From behind her came a muffled curse from her brother. "Damn it, Kel, how could you?" His voice sounded angry and disappointed. She only shrank further, almost sliding off the bench onto her knees. Garrett raised his hand, calling everyone to silence. "I guess that's all. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your support." Those present slowly began to move, talking in whispers. Kelly's mom couldn't stand it and ran out of the church, covering her face with her hands. Her father hurried after her, casting one bitter glance at his daughter. Garrett's parents remained, as did his brother and his wife. They approached him and hugged him silently. Tom stood a little further away, head down. Kelly seemed to cease to exist for everyone. Her world was collapsing, but there was already movement around her. Someone was comforting the crying. Someone was whispering angrily. She lay on the cold stone floor in front of the altar, lost track of time, lost in her grief. Suddenly, Garrett's voice was heard nearby, hoarse with emotion, but firm. "Get up." She raised her head. They found themselves almost alone. Besides them, only Tom and Garrett's brother remained in the church, standing at the exit and clearly waiting for their friend. Kelly tried to get up, leaning on the bench. Garrett offered her his hand, but not as support, rather as an escort. His fingers were cold. When she stood up with difficulty, he pulled away. "I hope," he said wearily, "that now you realize what you've done." Tears sparkled in his eyes, the first show of emotion he had ever seen. But he blinked quickly, holding them back. Kelly sobbed. "Garrett, please." She tried to take his hand, but he took it away. "No." "That's enough," he said harshly. "It's over, Kelly." She stood with her head down. She had nothing to object to. "You will move out of our house," he continued coldly. "I'll give you a week to pack your things. You can live with your parents or wherever you want for now. But everything is decided between us." She nodded, knowing she deserved it. There was still a spark of hope in my soul that maybe after a while, after listening to the apology. But looking at his petrified face, Kelly realized, no, he couldn't be convinced. Garrett took a deep breath, as if struggling with himself, then added more quietly, "I loved you, very, but the one I loved is no more. There is only a lie left, which I now want to forget as soon as possible." These words hit harder than a slap in the face. Kelly burst into tears again, covering her face with her hands. Garrett turned away. His brother touched him gently on the elbow, handing him his coat. Tom stood nearby, looking sternly at Kelly. As he was leaving, Garrett threw his last words over his shoulder. "I hope Brandon was worth it." His lips twitched in a bitter smile, and he quickly walked out of the church along with his comrades, without even looking back. The sunlight streaming through the open door blinded Kelly for a moment, and then the doors closed, and the empty church became quiet. Only one unfortunate woman, defeated by her own actions, remained standing at the altar, where several years ago she still believed in her fairy tale about happiness. Now nothing remains of that fairy tale. A week after the events at the church, Garrett's life seemed to go into autopilot mode. He moved to the sofa in his home office, leaving the marital bedroom empty not so much because of the memories, but because Kelly had taken her things from there. She moved out the very next day after the revelation, as he demanded. While the official papers were being processed, she settled with her parents. Garrett sat in the kitchen drinking his morning coffee and caught himself with a strange feeling. The house had finally become quiet, but this silence was different, not the tense one that had possessed them in recent months. It was an empty silence of loneliness, in which, however, relief was mixed. He no longer had to guess what was hidden behind his wife's silence or behind her forced smile. Now he knew the truth and was alone with his pain. The pain hasn't gone away. As soon as he closed his eyes, pictures appeared again before his inner gaze. Kelly in the arms of another, her tears in church, the disappointed faces of loved ones. The nights passed restlessly. He woke up several times. His heart was pounding, as if anxiety was still sitting inside. Sometimes, amid these painful awakenings, he asked himself, did he do the right thing? Was he too cruel? But then another part of her consciousness firmly answered, no, the betrayal deserved publicity, otherwise she would never have fully realized what she had done. Garrett took a sip of his cold coffee and sighed. Soft morning light streamed through the window, promising a warm day. In the past, on Saturdays like this, he and Kelly would go to the farmer's market or walk along the boardwalk, discussing plans for the week. Now he had to learn to live differently. The doorbell knocked him out of his thoughts. Garrett stood up, internally prepared for the fact that it could be one of his relatives or, suddenly, Kelly. But Tom was on the doorstep, carrying a box of donuts and 2 takeaway cups. Hi, buddy. Tom smiled a little shyly. I decided to stop by and check on you. Garrett stepped back, inviting him in. Hello, Tom. Come in. They went into the kitchen. Tom, putting the donuts on the table, cast a careful glance at his friend. How are you? You don't look good. Garrett shrugged his shoulders and grinned at the corners of his lips. What should I look like? Fine. I lied slowly. Tom nodded, opening the box. I understand. It's not easy. He hesitated. Listen, if anything, I can help with the move or something else. You were planning to put the house up for sale, weren't you? Garrett was really thinking about selling the house. There were too many memories, and it was too big for one. The day before, he had looked at advertisements for apartments closer to the city center and was looking for a smaller option. Yes, I think I'll sell it in a couple of months, Garrett answered, taking the donut without any appetite. But I won't rush. First, the divorce is officially finalized. Tom asked carefully. Have you already signed the documents? Garrett tensed his jaw and nodded. Yesterday, I took the application to court. Now a couple of months of formalities, and that's it. The word everything sounded with bitter relief. Tom patted him on the shoulder. You're doing great, Harry. Garrett looked at the donuts, glazed sugar, then couldn't help himself and asked what was gnawing at him. How is she? Tom understood who we were talking about. He sighed. If you want to know, it's pretty bad. I visited her father on business and saw her briefly. Looks broken. Garrett nodded silently. He wasn't happy that Kelly was feeling bad, more like a strange emptiness. Once he would have rushed to console her, but now that instinct has died. Did she ask you to give me something? He asked quietly, although he was afraid to hear about another apology. No, Tom shook his head. She understands that it's better not to disturb you now. She seemed to be trying to find out how you were through Rachel, but I think she's embarrassed to show up. There was silence. Garrett felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, justice had triumphed. On the other, a 7-year marriage ended in ruins, and he was still bitter. How are your parents? Garrett broke the silence. Yours? Everything is sad. Your mother is very worried. You know how much she loved Kelly. But he supports you, of course. He says he did the right thing. And Kelly's parents. I heard her father is angry, barely talking to her. Mother, she feels sorry for her, but she is also angry. Garrett ran a hand through his hair, feeling tired from all the drama. I didn't want to cause all of them such pain, honestly, he breathed. But otherwise I would have lived in a lie, Tom finished firmly for him. Yes, it was not easy for everyone, but now all the cards are on the table. They will recover. Garrett nodded, although the feeling of guilt towards his parents for the shame he had endured still gnawed at him. He only knew that he saw no other way he was not going to forgive the betrayal. Tom finished his coffee and said decisively, "Stop being sour. Let's go. Let's get some air. I'll take you to the stadium. I have an extra baseball ticket. You'll be distracted." At first, Garrett wanted to refuse. He wasn't in the right mood, but then he changed his mind. Sitting all day and going over memories is worse. Okay, why not? They left the house. The sun blinded his eyes, and Garrett froze for a second, exposing his face to the warmth. He remembered his own words spoken to Kelly in church. "I want to forget this lie as soon as possible." Well, there was still a lot of work ahead, but he was ready to start. "Hey, are you with us?" Tom called from the car. Garrett woke up from his thoughts and smiled at his friend. "Yes, let's go." For the first time in a long time, he felt that he could smile sincerely, without the burden of secrets and doubts. It was small, but already a victory. 2 months later, a gray court morning marked the official end of Blaine's marriage. Garrett entered the city courthouse exactly at the appointed time, holding a folder with documents in his hands. During these weeks, he became prettier. Although he was still a little pale, the old torment was no longer visible in his eyes, only the determination to finish the job. In the hallway outside the judge's office, he ran into Kelly. She came alone, wearing a simple dark blue blouse and black skirt, looking modest, almost faded. When she saw Garrett, she looked down. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," he answered just as quietly. They stood in awkward silence for several seconds. Garrett noted to himself how much she had changed. She had lost weight, her eyes were dull. He even felt a little sorry for her for a brief moment. The memory of the former cheerful Kelly pricked his heart. But he quickly drove away this pity. After all, it itself destroyed their lives. "Thank you for agreeing to the simplified procedure," Kelly said without looking up. "That I didn't delay." There was sincere gratitude and fatigue in her voice. Garrett nodded. "It's better for both of us." She looked at him timidly. "Garrett, can I tell you?" He waited silently. Kelly swallowed. "I wanted to ask for forgiveness again. I know I don't deserve him, but I'm really sorry. You don't have to answer. I just had to say." Her hand nervously fiddled with the strap of her purse. Garrett felt a strange calm spreading within him. Previously, these words might have melted his anger, but now he felt almost nothing, only fatigue from the whole story. "I heard you," he answered without hostility, but also without warmth. "I hope you will draw conclusions for yourself. And I wish you to find honesty in the future before building a new relationship." Kelly nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "You are the nicest person I've ever met. I understood everything as soon as I lost you." Garrett looked down. Once upon a time, recognition of her love was most important to him. Now these words only knocked on the fragments of what had once been their feelings. The judge's secretary left the office. "Blaine?" "Here," Garrett responded. He and Kelly exchanged one last glance and walked inside. The procedure took a matter of minutes. The judge formally approved the divorce by mutual consent. Kelly received several personal items, and her car, house, and other property remained with Garrett. There were no arguments. Everything was extremely dry and matter-of-fact. When they left the hall, Kelly stopped, as if about to say something goodbye. But Garrett didn't let the pause drag on. "Well, good luck to you," he said quietly, looking somewhere past her. Kelly sobbed and answered barely audibly. "And you, Garrett, you deserve happiness. Forgive me." He nodded weakly, turned around, and walked away down the corridor without looking back. Behind him, he heard her quiet crying, but he didn't stop. This chapter of life has finally closed. It was raining lightly outside. Garrett raised his face to the cool drops and suddenly felt the last stone fall from his soul. Now he was free. Free from lies, from the pain of waiting, from the torture of choice. It's over. He got into the car and sent a short message to Tom. All free. A couple of minutes later, the answer came. Great. Bar in the evening, let's celebrate. I'll treat you. Garrett smiled weakly. His friend did not leave him all these weeks. He either took him out for a walk or helped him with paperwork. Yesterday, they finally put the house on the market together. They found a realtor ready to handle the sale. Garrett decided to move to a rented apartment in the center, closer to work, in order to start with a clean slate in a new place. He turned the ignition key and turned on the radio. Some upbeat rock and roll melody began to flow, and Garrett suddenly felt a surge of lightness. Catching his reflection in the mirror, he suddenly saw there was not a broken man, but a man who had gone through hell, but survived. Even more than that, hardened. Changes awaited him ahead, and although the scars on his heart would remain, he believed that they would make him wiser. Pain taught him to value the truth, trust his intuition, and know his worth. On the way home, Garrett stopped at the gym where he had recently signed up. He began to devote time to himself more often. He resumed jogging in the morning and bought a membership to the pool. Physical fatigue helped suppress heavy thoughts, and gradually the thoughts became lighter. The training went well. He pushed himself on the treadmill, as if running away from all the ghosts of the past. After the shower, feeling pleasantly tired in his muscles, Garrett changed clothes and left the sports complex. The rain had already stopped, and the sun was breaking through the sky. Right at the entrance, he ran into his neighbor on the treadmill, a red-haired girl in her 30s, with whom he had exchanged words a couple of times in the last weeks of classes. She smiled at him. Good training, huh? Yeah, Garrett responded with a smile. You set the pace for me today. She laughed. We need competition to make progress. They walked together to the parking lot. The girl's name was Marcia. He remembered it from the last meeting. She chatted casually about how nice it was when the rain stopped and she could go for a run in the park on a weekend morning. Garrett suddenly caught himself thinking that he was listening to her with interest, not through force, but sincerely. He felt pleased. At her car, Marcia waved to him. See you on the path. Of course, Garrett nodded. Have a nice weekend, Marcia. And you, she got into the car and drove away. Garrett stood still for a couple of seconds, looking after her. My soul felt amazingly calm. He didn't make any plans for the pretty athlete. Perhaps they were just gym buddies. But the fact that he could smile and communicate with a woman without bitterness or suspicion meant that the wounds were beginning to heal. Then, walking up the steps to his rented apartment, Garrett took out his keys and suddenly remembered Kelly's words. You deserve to be happy. When she said them, he didn't take them in. He was too tired. And now I'm wondering, does he really allow himself to be happy? He opened the door and stood on the threshold. The small living room was flooded with sunlight. There was still very little decor on the wall, just his guitar leaning in the corner. Freshly bought fruits and vegetables lay on the kitchen table. He began to prepare healthy food for himself, taking care of his health. Small details that made up a new life. Garrett realized, yes, he was ready to let happiness in. It will not be the same as before, perhaps it will be quieter, more careful. But now he valued himself differently. He knew that he was worthy of honest love and respect, and would never allow anyone to treat him differently. By the evening, he will meet with friends, advertise the sale of the house, and tomorrow morning he will run along the embankment towards a new day. Life went on, and damn, she might be better ahead than he ever thought. That evening, Garrett came to his favorite bar, where Tom and a couple of other close friends were already waiting for him. They raised their glasses of beer, greeting him with cheers. Well, officially congratulations on your freedom, brother, Tom exclaimed, handing Garrett the mug. Garrett grinned and clinked glasses with everyone. Thanks, guys. They sat down at a corner table. The conversation at first revolved around everyday affairs. The friends deliberately did not touch on the painful topic. They told jokes and discussed the latest football news. Rachel casually mentioned that Brandon Wallace had suddenly resigned from their company the other day. Apparently, he couldn't stand the whispers and sidelong glances after his betrayal was revealed. Garrett just grinned at this. He no longer cared about the fate of his lover. Garrett felt almost like before all the shocks. He laughed at jokes, teased his friends, told stories from work. At some point, taking advantage of the pause, Tom nevertheless raised a toast. For Garrett, for going through hell, but coming out stronger. And for the new chapter of his life, may it be much happier. For a new life, friend Jay supported, raising his glass. Here's to you, Harry. Rachel, their mutual friend, who also came to support him, added with a smile. Garrett, touched, nodded, and took a sip. Warmth spread inside him both from the alcohol and from the realization that he was not alone. There were people nearby who appreciated him and worried about him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Come on, we're always there." Tom patted him on the shoulder. "And there are so many good things ahead of you, you will see." Garrett smiled. He was really starting to believe it. Later that night, walking home from the bar through the quiet city streets, he looked up at the clear, starry sky. 7 years ago, he looked at the same stars next to Kelly, full of hope for the future. Now he looked at them alone, but without despair. One path has ended, but a new road lies ahead. Garrett unclenched his fist, which had been unconsciously clutching the wedding ring in his pocket all this time. He stopped on a bridge over the river and took out a ring. The glint of metal caught the moonlight. Garrett remembered all the good and bad that was associated with this symbol, and then decisively raised his hand and threw the ring into the water. The ring disappeared into the dark river with a quiet splash. Garrett took a deep breath. He let go of the past. Now a future awaited him, unknown, frightening, but alluring with its possibilities. And with every step he took towards this future, Garrett felt his faith in himself returning, and that there would still be a place for real, honest happiness ahead. At the same time, on the other side of town, Kelly was sitting by the window of her old room in her parents' house. The darkness of night enveloped the quiet suburban area. On her lap lay an album of wedding photographs. For the past 2 weeks. She had been going through it almost every night, like a masochist reliving lost, happy moments. Nearby on the page was the smile of young Garrett, looking at her on her wedding day with such love that Kelly's throat tightened. She gently ran her fingers over his face in the photo and burst into tears. She still had her wedding ring on her ring finger. She had never been able to take it off since that day in church. It seemed to have stuck to the skin, reminding me of the sin I had committed. Kelly pressed her palms to her chest, trying to ease the pain. She lost everything: her loving husband, the respect of her parents, friends, her job after the scandal. She herself quit, unable to bear the shame. What about Brandon? The coward chose to flee. He quit and didn't even say goodbye to her. It doesn't matter. No one is to blame but herself. She looked through her tears at the starry sky outside the window and remembered how she and Garrett had once admired the stars, making wishes. How he said that he would love her forever, and she believed him. How she herself swore to remain faithful to him, and how mediocrely she broke both his heart and her life. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the void, turning to the image of Garrett somewhere there, under the same sky. If only we could turn back time. But time moved inexorably forward, leaving her behind completely alone. Nothing can be fixed. Kelly lowered her head onto her folded hands, silently sobbing for the happiness she had personally burned to the ground. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.